you're very in favor of marriage and family. You're not one of
Yes,
those
absolutely.
red pill manosphere types, but you are in favor of prenups. Would you walk us through that a little bit? Because a lot of people who are, Christian, we would assume like, oh, it's just essentially setting yourself up for failure, but you see it a different way.
Yeah, and I used to agree with all that. I used to agree with all those arguments up until maybe 6 months ago, when I actually decided to do some learning and research,
Mhm.
rather than kind of just speaking in memes and talking points of not knowing what I'm really talking about. And most people have heard the term prenup, but very few people actually know what it means. And I was one of those same people who thought, oh, well, there's no reason you to get that unless you're sort of planning for some type of failure. And then I actually did more learning and research and listened to people, and I changed my view. It's probably, is it a big issue? I'd say it's certainly an issue that one of the issues I've changed my mind on, done a complete 180 on, pretty much, at least a 170 on, in recent times. So do you want me to just kind of walk through the way that I now see it?
Sure, because I mean, like I said, I think a lot of people who talk about prenups, they're coming from a perspective of like, oh, if divorce. And I think,
Mhm.
my husband especially is very, very, very Catholic in his belief that like that's not even like that's not
Yep.
even, so like if I had
Okay.
wanted a prenup, usually it's, kind of the man who wants the prenup. But like if I had asked him for a prenup, that would have in
Mhm.
his mind been a big red flag.
Mhm.
Because it's kind of like, are you saying this is a possibility? I guess
Okay.
what are your thoughts?
Yeah, sure thing, man. Okay, there's actually a lot to go through here. It's the first time talking about it on a podcast, so it'll definitely be interesting. Um, I think the first thing is to recognize, because I know, obviously most of the pushback came from more traditional leaning conservatives. It came from
Mhm.
fellow Christians. It came from, more conservative people. And I think the first thing, like I said, is, first of all, I totally understand that perspective, because it's the perspective I had held for up until less than a year ago.
Right.
Um, and a lot of the things that people were saying are just straight up incorrect. I think that when it comes to marriage and what marriage is supposed to be and what it's supposed to mean and attitude towards divorce, I would imagine that you and I, Lauren, we are completely on the same page.
Mhm.
Um, the problem is that the law, society, and culture no longer are.
Right.
Okay. So we both believe that a marriage is a covenant made between a man, a woman, their families, and God. It is an everlasting covenant. It is two people becoming one and coming together. And it is designed to last forever. And divorce is supposed to be completely off the table. Um, I agree that that is exactly what it's supposed to be. The problem is that legally it's not, and the law doesn't care about your religion, right? The courts don't. The courts, the lawyers, all the whole system doesn't care about religion. And also in the USA, or even Canada, UK, whatever, USA is particularly bad. We don't need to go through all the statistics, but the statistics are what they are. And something being an average doesn't mean that it applies to every individual, right? It's not like
Right.
that. Um, but the truth is, we live in a place where legally, there's no fault divorce. A divorce can be initiated for any reason at any time. There doesn't need to be infidelity. There doesn't need to be, abandonments. There doesn't need to be physical abuse, mental abuse, anything like that. It can just be, quote unquote, we grew apart, or one person got bored, or one person wasn't happy, or we see all the frivolous reasons. Like, people like to jump to extreme cases of abuse and, all these type of things. But the truth is, that's not the typical situation. And I think in the USA, the average marriage only lasts 7 years. Unfortunately, 7 to 8 years.
Mhm.
Like, that's the official average. So in light of all this, I believe that it is wise for people, the couple themselves, to create their own rules, whatever they want that to be, by the way. Um, I don't think that it is, to me, it's like, it's actually marriage insurance. I think that you can create a prenuptial agreement between yourself and your spouse or your future spouse, or a postnuptial agreement, where actually you create it in a way that takes marriage closer back to what it is supposed to be, and makes the incentives correct. One of the big problems now, people are like, oh, why are all these young men being put off marriage? Why don't all these guys just settle down? Men are not avoiding marriage. Men are avoiding divorce. They're avoiding divorce courts. They're avoiding getting dragged through the mud. There have been far too many dozens and dozens of millions of people. For some people, it's their fathers, their uncles, their friends, people they know who have been dragged through this entire system, and they've been pig slaughtered from it. And so I think it's good for people to have a sense of marriage insurance. I would also say that I'm gonna go through like a few different points here. I think that the truth is, given that we have laws, you probably saw me make this point many times on Twitter, is that every marriage already has a prenuptial agreement. It's just whatever the courts decide. So whatever state, whatever country you live in, there is a default set of marriage laws and a default set of divorce laws. We already talked about no fault divorce, which I assume that we're both against, but it is the law of the land. Like, that is what the default is. And so in the absence of a prenuptial agreement decided by the individuals, you are saying, okay, we're going to do this under the law of the land and the state, and we're going to go with everything that entails. And I think with quite literally any other contract that you can imagine, it could be a mobile phone contract, it could be buying a house, it could be a rental agreement, it could be purchasing a car or leasing a car, or whatever it is. You always want the terms to make sense and to be fair, and not to create perverse incentives. If I offer you a contract for some type of business deal or whatever it is, it makes sense. Well, number one, to read it through. Most people never read it through. It makes sense to read it through and to make sure that it's fair and it's reasonable and it makes sense. And a lot of people would say, actually, the way it's currently set up isn't necessarily reasonable and fair. It doesn't make sense. You have things from, like, the 1930s or 1940s when, women didn't work, and, the man was 100% the breadwinner and whatever. I'm talking specifically things like alimony and so on. And it made sense back then. And then you're living in a time where, in some cities, women are literally out earning men and whatever, and you're still you've got one foot in feminism and progressivism, and the other foot still holding on to this type of traditionalism and more old school chivalry ideas about family and so on. And these things don't mesh well. And so that's why so many men are being put off by it. But let me get into what I think what I think that they actually do, and then we can have like more of a convo. So I've already mentioned that there's a default nuptial agreement just by getting married, at least getting married under the state. By the way, all of the things I'm saying, this is assuming that people want to get married like officially with the government seal of approval and the state. If people want to just elope or just have it with their church or with their family or whatever, then a lot of this stuff doesn't apply. So I'm assuming that this is people who want to, do it with the state. And I would question if that's even necessary, by the way. So I view it as a form of insurance. I think that you can improve the incentives. You can just have a very simple agreement, which actually takes away the potential perverse incentives. We all know, look, let's take an extreme example, but you don't even need to go that extreme, right? If Elon Musk were to get married, right? There could be a situation where he gets married under the default situation, to an unscrupulous woman, or maybe a woman who seemed scrupulous at the time, but wasn't, whatever. And then at some point she decides to divorce him and now, take away half of his assets. Right. I think it would be very hard to make an argument that is fair. Like,
right.
I don't see any world where that is remotely fair. And you can also see that it's a very perverse incentive. Everyone has a proclivity towards temptation and towards sin. If you have a situation where you can sin and you can be rewarded for sinning and make, millions or billions from the result of you making a bad decision that's harmful for yourself and relationship and your family and whatever, and you can be rewarded for it, that's messed up. That should not be the case. It didn't used to be the case, but it's the case now because of no-fault divorce laws. So you can improve the incentives. You can avoid potential future arguments. One of the biggest reasons why couples get in trouble is, discussions about money, right? How is money going to be handled? Is it going to be we're pooling absolutely everything together? Is it going to be yours, mine, and ours, where, most of it is in the ours, but, people have their individual stuff as well. You can decide how that is going to be handled up front. You can also have protection. So, look, people come in different situations. You have people who own businesses and are parts of businesses. You have people who have real estate properties. They've got rentals coming in. This is all prior to them even being married. You've got people who are from wealthy families. They have potential inheritances down the line. You've got people who have got all kinds of debt, car loans, student debt, credit card debt, all those sorts of things. And you can lay out, okay, how is this all going to be handled? Are we going to take on each other's debts? Are we going to like split this? Is it like, cool, everything you had before and everything I had before, I own 3 properties already and a business, and you've got this and this and this. Keep in mind also, people are generally getting married later now. That we're not just talking about two broke 18-year-olds meeting each other. Whatever you decide, all I'm saying is you can decide how all that is handled. Instead of like leaving it up to the default situation, you can decide how all of those things are going to be handled. And so for those reasons, I think if you have the option to do that, then why wouldn't you? And I think it's also good that it forces these conversations. I know these are not romantic and fun and sexy conversations, but these are conversations that people should be having. It's not fun talking about debt. It's not fun talking about like money and property and inheritances and like it's all of this stuff is from an idealistic perspective. I'm not really like a fan of any of these things, right? I think it's just like, oh, just fall in love, elope, and run off, and everything great, and God's got you covered. I do agree with the ideal, but I just don't think that is the reality. And the last point I would make on this is, I think if people actually want to, I think if people genuinely want, like a lot of the traditional conservatives want more men to, they want more men and women to get married and be monogamous and form families and do all of this stuff. But the reason why many men are not doing it or they're delaying it is it's not because they're quote unquote scared to man up or like whatever silly straw man argument people want to put out there. It's because the incentive is not aligning with the male perspective. More and more men are just like, you know what, this is not a good deal, right? The risk versus reward ratio is not making sense. So actually, I think that people are being kind of a little bit boneheaded and short-sighted by being against something as simple as a prenuptial agreement, which can give people additional assurance that, okay, everything is overboard. Maybe someone is coming into a situation with a lot of wealth and they're like, okay, I don't want to, I love this person. I love you. I trust you. Like we're going to do all this, but I'm not really comfortable with X. So like, why don't we just make a little adjustment for this so that everything is on the same page and we've just got that additional assurance. Look, like I said, if you take someone as extreme as Elon, like I don't think that Elon Musk could like meet any woman where in the back of his mind at some level he's not going to be concerned that she's with him for his money.
Right.
Like, and he can't be, and so, but I think if the woman was like, look, like let's just have like this agreement, whatever, then he's like, okay, cool. Like that's in fact the red flag from someone like that's perspective. People need to understand the red flag would be the woman being adamantly against it, because it's like, well, why? Like if that's all not like an issue or something you're pursuing or whatever, and we're not going to get divorced anyway, then why be opposed to this thing where it's just like protecting me? Like, let's be honest, women generally want to get married because marriage gives them some protection and security.
Right.
Okay. So why should the male part of the equation just be left out? By the way, it doesn't have to be male. There's lots of women now who are making a lot of money.
I mean, Britney Spears and her ex-husband, I'm pretty sure they had what I would imagine is a pretty ironclad prenup.